Dragon's Dogma 2 is an upcoming single-player third-person action RPG developed by Capcom, and it's easily one of the most anticipated titles of 2024. And it's personally the game I'm most excited for this year.
Let me in! Let me in!
And today I'll be going over various details like gameplay, vocations, the world, and other basic stuff that's good to know before you head into the game, especially for you beginners. I've also added timestamps for your convenience. How's it going, by the way? MrHulthen here, and if you'd like to see more of Dragon's Dogma 2 and various other RPGs, then remember to hit the like button and subscribe to MrHulthen. First off, let's kick off with the world and story of Dragon's Dogma 2. What are we looking at here? Well, Dragon's Dogma 2 looks to, as far as we know, be set in a parallel world, or at least far removed time-wise from the first Dragon's Dogma, making it a soft reboot of sorts for the franchise. Without giving too much away, the original Dragon's Dogma has a certain story that makes it hard to really ascertain when DD2 actually takes place, but what we do know is that in Dragon's Dogma 2 we'll be starting out in the Kingdom of Vermund, also known as the Kingdom of Humanity. And an interesting thing to note is that there are several similarities between Vermund and Gransys, which was the country from the original Dragon's Dogma. Not only in terms of it being a large, lush open world, but also in architecture, as several places seen in various materials suggest that this could very well be the same country somehow, just with a different name and a different history. However, Vermund is not the only country we'll be adventuring in, as we'll also be making our way to Batal, which is the kingdom of the Beastren, you know, the beast-like people you see here. This place is unlike anything we've seen before in Dragon's Dogma, and according to Capcom, this country is famous for its massive canyons and ancient ruins. So it already sounds like a pretty dangerous place. But, you know, as gamers, that's kinda exactly what we're looking for.
I am the danger.
There's also Sacred Arbor, which is described as the home of the elves, and just like you'd expect from classic fantasy, Sacred Arbor looks to be a place of nature and, well, plants. Lots of plants. Essentially, it's going to be a pretty lush place with deep woods and various elven architecture, and looks to be the exact opposite of the canyons of Batal. Now, while we're speaking of elves, an interesting new mechanic is actual language, and if your Arisen, that being your character, doesn't understand Elvish, your elven pawns can translate for you, which I think is a really cool detail.
Forgive me, you do not speak our tongue, do you? From this moment forth, so long as you remain by my side, I shall interpret for you.
Okay, so what are pawns then, and what's this about an Arisen? Well, the Arisen is your character, and it's simply the title that refers to you rising up to essentially reclaim your heart from the dragon. And just like in the first Dragon's Dogma, your heart will be claimed and eaten by this one dragon once more. The pawns are essentially servants of the Arisen, and it's their job to both learn from and assist the Arisen in their quest to reclaim their heart. And just like in the first Dragon's Dogma, pawns in DD2 will be much more advanced than they appear. As an example, pawns are programmed to learn from your playstyle, and so if you're one of those players that tends to charge headfirst into battle, your pawn will take after you and start doing that more and more. And you can essentially teach them to become the ultimate warrior through your own gameplay. But it goes both ways, so if you're useless in battle, they will become useless as well.
Oh, my leg!
When it comes to Dragon's Dogma 2, however, it seems like the pawns are going to be much more advanced than before, and they seemingly have an even bigger role to play in the story as well. Apparently, there's a sort of disease going around called the Dragon's Plague that causes pawns to perform better, but there seems to be a trade-off as they start becoming more bold with their speech and behavior. So I think we're looking at the possibility of pawns possibly going rogue on us. I mean, look at the shot right here. You can't tell me that this pawn doesn't look corrupted.
Give me your money.
Anyway, one thing that's been a really positive surprise that I'm personally looking forward to is the seemingly much more improved plot and characters. You see, as much as I love the original Dragon's Dogma, the story and characters of the world just wasn't its strengths. Well, except for maybe the ending and the general message that the game is trying to tell you, which is pretty excellent and even mind-blowing. But I oftentimes found myself baffled at how bare bones a lot of the characters were, and so seeing this much effort put into making NPCs into actual people this time around, and the focus on intrigue and dialogue in the Dragon's Dogma 2 trailers, it just has me very excited for the story this time around.
The return of the Sovereign.
Now, of course, any of you watching this video that have played Dragon's Dogma knows that what makes this franchise so very special is the gameplay. Now, the original Dragon's Dogma quite simply has some of the best combat I've experienced in a video game, and the crazy thing is that the combat in of itself holds up really well to this day. It's difficult to describe Dragon's Dogma's combat, but two words I'd use to describe it are heavy and visceral. There's nothing quite so satisfying like shooting off a salvo of arrows that completely stunlocks massive enemies in their tracks, or calling down a rain of meteors to completely obliterate any monster in your vicinity.
Dodge this, you bastard!
Speaking of arrows and spells, Dragon's Dogma 2 will feature 10 different vocations for you to choose from, vocations being Dragon's Dogma's answer to classes. This means that DD2 will have one more vocation to pick from. However, as Capcom has combined some of the vocations from Dragon's Dogma like the Assassin, Strider, and Ranger into more streamlined vocations called the Archer and Thief, and also replacing Mystic Knight with the Mystic Spearhand, you could technically say that there's 3 new vocations to choose from, these being the Mystic Spearhand, the Trickster, and the Wayfarer. So all in all, we have the Fighter, Archer, Thief, Mage, Warrior, Sorcerer, Magic Archer, Mystic Spearhand, Trickster, and Wayfarer, and they all look incredibly fun to play from what we've seen. The new Trickster and Wayfarer both look like really interesting new additions, with the Trickster using a sensor as a weapon to cast various illusions and other deceptive tactics. And this is probably going to be one of those classes you should check out if you like to distract your enemies while your pawns gang up on them. You can supposedly also buff your pawns as a Trickster, so it's definitely going to be a new experience for all you Dragon's Dogma veterans. The Wayfarer are supposedly a sort of jack of all trades, and they can use any weapon and learn various skills from other vocations. Which sounds pretty cool, but the downside seems to be that the Wayfarer has lower base stats than purer classes, so they're not going to be as strong as, say, a Sorcerer when using magic. Still, this seems like one of those vocations that's very new player friendly, as you can seemingly pick and choose your playstyle rather than going full on Magician or Barbarian. Speaking of Barbarian, the Warrior vocation is said to have been buffed considerably this time around. As most of you older fans probably remember that the Warrior was always rather underpowered compared to essentially every other vocation in DD1. One of these reasons being that you could only have 3 skills at a time, so aside from being a slow and cumbersome class, you can't really adapt to varying situations with the Warrior in the original game. In Dragon's Dogma 2, however, Warriors not only get more skills to choose from and use, but they also get a new tackle ability that lets you interrupt your combo and enemy attacks to stun your enemies and avoid damage. The Greatsword from Monster Hunter is probably the closest in terms of gameplay, so if you love using that in Monster Hunter, you're probably gonna love the Warrior here this time around. Aside from that, vocations seem more maneuverable than before, and vocations like the Sorcerer and Mage not only seem to have slightly quicker casting animations, but also being able to move about faster when casting various spells. Calling down meteors and other insanely powerful spells is still probably going to be very slow, but hey, you gotta strike a balance somehow, right? Anyhow, I can't wait to see what other batshit insane spells Dragon's Dogma 2 will introduce us to, as Bolide is easily one of my favorite attacks ever. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this video is only meant to cover the basics, so I'll delve into stuff like class guides and other content when the game actually releases, so look forward to that. With all this said, you might be asking, do I need to play Dragon's Dogma before Dragon's Dogma 2? And well, no, at least I don't think so. Again, without giving too much away, Dragon's Dogma is a pretty self-contained game, and it has a sort of finality to it, which is why I'm expecting Dragon's Dogma 2 to play out mostly the same in terms of plot, albeit with some interesting variation. So if you want my tip, play Dragon's Dogma first if you just want to play a good game, but if you're doing it for story reasons, then it's probably a better idea to hold off and just play Dragon's Dogma 2 instead. Because as much as I love Dragon's Dogma, there are definitely aspects about the game that's frankly aged like milk.
The fuck?
That said, Dragon's Dogma 2 is looking like a fine wine, and I can't wait until it finally releases on the 22nd of March this year. Alright, if you like what you've seen here, then remember to comment, like, and subscribe for more MrHulthen signing out.